Great.
You know,
I'm
not that, right?
Nothing.
Cool.
Catch.
You want me to run the committee real quick? I'm sure he's got something to throw.
Yeah.
All right.
Illuminate us.
No, illumination class is down the hall.
Illuminate us, Sensei. Or do you prefer Shifu?
Actually, if and when they drop that collar on me, that will be the title they go with. Until then, it's just Lord.
Okay.
Fair. So here's the disclaimer. I am not professionally trained in psychology. What I know about this comes from teaching Taekwondo. Again, that was several years ago, but I was trained in a professional capacity to teach Taekwondo. And then I destroyed my knee, and that was never going to happen again. But hey, I found a use for all that skill here in the SCA.
Fair enough.
I have run this by people with professional psychological training, and they're like, yeah, you're good. This looks good. Why didn't I think of this? So thank you, Master Gwen. The meat of this is not a ton of material. So this is kind of intended to be a little bit of a discussion. Feel free to hop in with questions. If you have ideas, if you have relevant commentary.
Directed that.
It's going to be one of those videos. And I'll go tear into this. People are different. Brains and bodies are different. And this is only a general view that should form a foundation for teaching others. I hope everybody here will be able to adapt this to their own students. I designed this primarily for educating fencers, but brains are similar enough that those of you who teach armored fighters, those of you who teach archers, if you teach any sort of repetitive skill or mechanical skill where repetition and precision is useful, this class is useful to you. If not, I hope you still have fun in this class. Not everything here will apply to everyone. I try to avoid those sort of blanket statements, but I cannot just throw caveats in front of literally everything I say. Flow with it. Form a relationship with your students that allows you both freedom and permission to adapt as necessary. This class was originally a companion to an 8-week rapier curriculum roadmap that I have written. I can get copies of this class digitally as a living document through Google Docs and the rapier curriculum to each and everybody who's interested in that. I'll have that available after the class. Link in the description or something, I guess, either YouTube. I'll start with definitions here. What is a skill progression? Begins with a foundation of knowledge and technique, musical scales, your sentence structure for learning a language, your stance for a martial art, and your foundational motions. This is your step, your box step, your advance, your reverse. This is a chord. I don't know a thing about music. I will you. As step 2, by definition, a progression should flow naturally into the more complicated material. Lesson 2 will use lesson 1 as a foundation. Its information expands only slightly. Like last week, we're doing advance. Okay, I could teach you how to turn that advance into a lunge very easily. Now that you've been doing this step back and forth in your hallway for a week, here's how you actually make that an attack. That sort of thing. Early material needs to retain its value. You will never not need to know how to parry. You don't teach somebody something and then go, okay, now we're going to modify that and we're going to make it better. That's teaching them a habit they have to unlearn. That's teaching them a skill and then telling them later that that skill is actually useless. That will break their faith in you as a teacher. And the most important part of
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
most important part of a skill progression is that it calls back to the previous material. All previous points, and you're providing the tools to link those skills together. Okay, we've been doing an advance and a lunge for the last 2 weeks, and I just taught you how to parry. Cool, so when I do this, advance forward and parry, and hey, look, you're within attack range. Very, very, like, brief example, but that's how these things should work. So the full title of this class is The Psychology of Skill Progression and How to Avoid the Fire Hose. And the next thing we need to define is, what is the fire hose? And that is meandering and info dumping and things that will overwhelm the student, especially a new student. I can talk for hours on end about one particular book in the known library of 17th century Italian fencing. Just one book. And if you mention the others, I will branch off into those. It's useless for somebody in their first week. Every list of fact that you, or every fact that you list that you've got in your head about this, that, and the other thing, true as they might be, and as much as we love to nerd out about our favorite thing, they don't help when they're piled on somebody's head when they're still trying to figure out how to walk. And that the weight of their helmet is making their neck flop around. Like they don't care that this is how William Marshall ran a tournament. Hey, not a rapier reference is fine.
Yes.
The revelation that there's so many things that a person doesn't know about the field they just stepped into can be intimidating. That things they're not doing correctly yet. If you're teaching them one skill and like their shoulders a little off or whatever, but you're working on footwork, don't tell them off their shoulder. Like they're going to drop their shoulder when they step or whatever. Cool. Get the feet in place first. It goes back to not discouraging your students. But all this can stifle progress, drive them away. Opening that fire hose on a student will blast them straight out the door. If anybody has not gotten the reference, you get to drink from the fire hose. No, UHF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stanley Spadowski's Clubhouse.
Okay, right, yeah, you're right.
I'm a movie nut.
I know because I used to watch your threads on the bad movies you watch, and I admire your taste. If there's a blank look on their face, you've been talking for a minute straight, you stray away from the original subject all the time because there's another cool thing for the same situation you want to show them. You've probably opened the fire hose.
So, a question for you. So, I often look for that look, right? And then I'll ask the student, are you interested in hearing more about this, or have you had enough today? Almost never will they say, I've had enough today. And I sometimes worry that they say that because they're talking to somebody who they feel like would like to talk more about the subject. Should I just trust my instinct and stop?
For the first couple of times you have that engagement with a specific student, go ahead and let them feel that they have that authority to say, no, keep going. Or tell them, if you really want me to shut up, I will. Like, give them permission to say, hey, I've had enough. Like, vocally give them permission instead of just asking them to commentate. You'll get to know that person, I hope, and you'll figure out with them, again, back to building a relationship where enough is enough. I don't think there's anything wrong with going, hey, I can go off on this for another 5 minutes. And if they want you to, cool. And if they want you to stop, obviously, please don't. There's probably some stuff on here, or in here on that. I haven't run this class in a while. So, just to recap, like, we know now what I mean by a skill progression. We know now what I mean by the fire hose. And you have all just been tricked into a very basic form of this style of education. Because I have established a common vocabulary for the purposes of this class. We speak the same language now. When I say fire hose, you know exactly what I mean. When I say cavazione, a 17th century Italian fencer knows what I mean. Jargon is useful, even if it's in the original Italian, or if it's a total Scadianism. Do not be afraid to label a thing with your students and tell them what it is, and use that phrase regularly.
Question on that point. How do you strike a balance between jargon specific to the style that you're studying and therefore teaching your students versus jargon that is better known across the SCA that might be different from what you specifically are studying and teaching your students?
This is where I have probably my personal issues, because I will use the Italian terminology where there is no better English translation, like for something like cavazione.
Yeah.
The English translation of that is an attack that begins on the other side of the sword. Realistically, it derives from the word for cave, as in to cave in, to give, to yield.
Yeah. So
that doesn't help. We call it a disengage in the SCA, I'm guessing, from modern fencing.
Yeah.
It is slightly different. I would prefer that if you were teaching for a specific book, specific style, that you use the phrases in that specific school.
So I've come up to that a couple of times because I studied largely Iberian fencing, La Verdadera, Destreza, and earlier.
Right, so you have a thrust to the quarter circle where they would call it a half cavazione, a mezza cavazione.
Yeah.
I also studied Destreza.
Yeah.
If you were teaching your student Destreza, use the terminology. If you were teaching Fabris, use the Fabricine terminology. If you're teaching Swetnam, Saviolo, I feel sorry for you. I'm kidding, Saviolo fans. Use that terminology. And when they engage with somebody else in the SCA, your student is smart enough to go, oh, that's what your school calls a thing. Okay, cool. But that vocabulary between you and the student is fundamental. I have lost my place in my notes. Teaching these things early, we begin to establish the same sort of vocabulary for X activity, both verbally and physically. I can cue you to perform this specific move by saying, mezza cavazione. I don't have to say, okay, now point your sword underneath mine every time. Half disengage. Okay, you point your sword directly underneath mine every time. You know where it's going. As an added bonus, we emphasize a safe way to perform these techniques for the students and their opponents when we move on to calibration. That is, as it is attached to my curriculum roadmap, which again can be made available to everybody. So how do we teach that? Teaching a physical skill is very hard. Learning one is harder. I'm not going to pretend telling somebody a thing is easy and then them not getting it the first time. That is another way to rapidly crush your students. And this is where we really start diving into that psychology bit. Looking at fundamental skills, things like taking a guard, stepping around and holding a sword. We think, those of us who are experienced in it, think this is the early easy stuff. Just have them do what we do. Yeah, but also no. If they're not getting it right away, you give them the impression they're not good enough to keep going, that they don't have that fundamental talent for the skill you're trying to impart upon them. Talent is a lie. Talent is a lie. Cool. I'm only going to beat that horse twice. They shouldn't have to go on past that. That's why I call the early things fundamental core skills. There's still things you have to train. They're not easy. Just been doing it a long time. I know we have 2 knights in here that I recognize. 3? No, okay, two knights. We have some veteran fencers, some veteran artisans in here. I've been doing just this particular art for going on 16 years. I could probably do the fundamental stuff while sleepwalking. But telling people that it's easy is not true. The alternative, you tell them this is hard stuff. It's not the way most bodies are used to moving. Fighting is antithetical to who most people are. The way we walk in an SCA sport combat scenario versus the way we wander around is probably very different for most of us. We have to find out together what works best for your student. And there's a lot more on that particular topic if you want to join in on my next class right here, right after this. Minus a small break in between, because I'm going to want a small break in between. And like I said, this isn't a huge amount of material. I'm not sure I'm going to fill the whole hour unless we want to talk.
We might.
You might, Travis, you might. Yeah. I'm more than happy to, of course. Like, by all means, for those who have also been teaching for a very long time, if I say something you have a different experience with, jump in.
No, I'd say you're pretty well nailing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Good.
No, seriously. I mean, as Jeff, you made some points that I think. How long have you been fighting, Jimmy?
10 years this, 20 years total.
40. You put words. 43. Right? You put a sentence to an idea that I understand, but didn't have a sentence for. Or maybe didn't have a good sentence for it. Probably had a sentence for it.
Or 6.
Good. But a good
30.
a better way to maybe communicate that.
Well, catch me on that later, because I'd love to know what it is. Again, the other material, I do kind of have copies of this, kind of.
Well, just continue. You're fine.
I have two copies of my handout to go.
We'll get it from you. We'll get it from you electronically.
And
continue onward.
Yes. I don't have the other material it's referencing, which is kind of a shame. That's probably turning into a book. But like I said, these are going to be living documents. They will be regularly updated. That's why I prefer to hand out a digital link. Okay, so it's not stuff most bodies are used to using. Referencing a section I wrote on taking your guard, I mentioned that turning the back leg out 90 degrees from facing your opponent is an ideal. Some people may not be able to reach that right away. Some people will never be able to reach that. Lady hips are different. Some people with jacked up knees, bad ankles, messed up tendon for whatever reason in any part of either leg, back issues. If you have to do that torque to get your guard in place, and you also are trying to turn that leg out, That's, yeah.
Just to add a small, something I define as fighting is you are not the sum of your training. You are the sum of your injuries and how you treat them. So we had house guests last night, and I put on my 5 ice packs, one on my back, one on my left elbow, one on my left knee, one on my ankle, and one on my shoulder. And I sit for 20 minutes every single night. So he said, "Are you hurting?" No. I am
Because
59.
Not if I do this.
And I do this maintenance because it is required if I want to stay competitive, and I don't have a lot of time left. How old are you, Jamie?
42.
Preventive care.
Right. Don't wait till it hurts to treat it, but you are the sum of your injuries, treated or untreated. So I do mountain of maintenance. I'm on the treadmill. I lift weights, but mostly I ice. It's cheap. It's easy. It works.
One of my new guys saw me wrapping my knee in practice last week. He was like, I didn't know your knee was acting up. Something it's not. And it won't be after this because I'm wrapping it before I'm doing this stupid thing to my body for the 15th year in a row. After nearly 30 years of other stupid things to my body like Taekwondo and Kendo, Kenjutsu, Capoeira. Yeah.
You got to do the maintenance.
Yeah,
It becomes a wedge for maintaining skills. But I know that I am not far from losing my competitive edge at a crown level. I'll always be a good fighter. I'll never not be good at it. I've spent a whole lifetime. I started when I was 15 and I'm 59. And I'm still pretty competitive. But if I don't do these things, and I am honest with people, myself and a couple of the other knights who are a little more in years, occasionally just message each other pictures of us sitting on the thing which is covered in. There's more ice packs in my freezer than food. But you know what? My back doesn't hurt today at all.
Yeah.
And I'll ice it again tonight when I get home.
But even the period sources on rapier say the same thing. Like, not everybody is going to be capable of, say, getting down in that Fabricine guard. And at 45 years old, like, I can't stay this low anymore. I'll get there if I have to hit somebody just right. But my guard can't live there anymore. I don't know how Logos does it.
He's incredibly fit.
Some people are just built different.
He got out of heavy fighting. So Logos was knighted in 83.
Yeah.
And he got out of heavy fighting as soon as Rapier showed up and Guillaume Lafort got out of heavy. 90s. So he's been out of heavy fighting for probably pushing not less than 25 years.
And the speed of their progression is not important, which is the other thing. Some of us, it's going to take up some time to build up the muscle to throw a flat snap. It's fine. And in the other form, speed isn't important while they're learning a technique. Never perform a technique more quickly than you can do it correctly.
There's those little nuggets.
Yeah. Even in a competition, if you cannot throw that shot fast enough to hit and make it stick, don't throw that shot. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to miss. Thing in general. We love living on how much time do I have to, there it is. Cool.
The moment arrives.
The correct repetition of a technique over time will develop that speed. Slow, smooth, fast. We've all heard some variation of that.
What you just said was better. Never do a technique faster than you can do it correctly.
Yes.
That's what slow is. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Or, that's what it's saying. But that buzz term doesn't make sense to anybody who's not been in the sport a while.
And to the fast part.
Yeah.
And the way I tell my students is do this and make sure you're getting it right each time. Don't go for, I need to do 15 of these every day. I need to do 15 of these correctly, as long as it takes. And I need to recognize which ones are incorrect, and I need to throw those out of my head. And that's there's a whole class about getting rid of bad habits and the baggage that goes with it. Oh my God, yeah. That's a class I still need to write.
Oh, please do.
I vaguely remember being told something that you have to do something X number of times correctly to help you to basically forget about the incorrect time that you performed it.
Yeah, so there's a neurological aspect to that, there's a
Yes.
psychological aspect to that, which are completely different things. One is actually talking about your mind, the software, and the other is the hardware, your actual
The
brain.
brain, yeah. And there are those are two
Right.
different things, the
Right.
mind and the brain. A lot of people don't know the difference. I'm a counselor by trade. This is
That's terminology I got from a therapist friend of
Yeah.
mine,
Yeah.
that I
There's
absolutely love.
something that you said in there. The problem isn't learning to do the technique correctly, in my opinion. The problem is believing you're doing the technique correctly.
Yes, yes.
And one of the things my night taught me, and it took a long time, I'm a slow learner. I mean, I've kind of plodded through in a deliberate process, and I just was never smart enough to quit. I have no physical talent. I have no sports skill. Can't throw a baseball, can't throw a football. I suck at all sports except this one. But the doing it correctly and believing that you're doing it correctly can be a huge gulf. You may have mastered the technique long before you can understand. And here I was in a class this morning, and you were in there, and Uller said something, and I was like, Jesus, somebody taught me that 20 years ago, and I didn't understand it. And he, with 5 words, suddenly a piece of the puzzle just went clunk.
The mechanically correct performance of a skill, as applies to fighting especially, does not necessarily mean that you're going to get it in the right time, at exactly the right distance every time, but at least getting the motion correct.
muscle memory is real.
Mm-hmm.
You just said there, and again,
Teaching timing is again, like there are professional boxing coaches that I can't teach you timing. You have to have it or you don't. That's BS. But teaching timing is a totally different skill than teaching the physical skill.
You know, you said there was somebody will say to you in a fight, I don't understand why you didn't take that leg shot. I threw the perfect shot. I said, you did throw the perfect shot, you didn't land the perfect shot. And it's like, people are, I mean, we spend a lot of time in our sport trying not to get hit.
I'm going to tangent off of that just a little bit away from my notes. I find drilling to be of minimal usefulness because a drill, while I talk about learning a skill and correctly repeating the motion to learn a skill, a drill is correctly repeating the same thing over and over and over, and it will show you exactly where to throw that shot, show you exactly how far to step in a lunge. How far do you step in a lunge?
As far as you need to.
Far enough to touch your opponent. If my lunge is always, I am gaining 4.5 feet on my tip, and my opponent is closer than that, I have a problem. I have a marshal it problem right there where I have just absolutely pezzed my friend. If they are just a little more than that 4.5 feet, and I always throw that 4.5 foot lunge because I've drilled that 4.5 foot lunge, I'm going to come up short every single time, even when I can throw a 5.5 foot lunge and choose not to, because it's exhausting and it's a little harder on my joints. So you can drill something with your students to show them how a thing works. But the important part is the correct result of the drill, not the correct performance of the exact same
repetition.
motion.
I think that maybe I would say repetition, like traditional old school stand at the pel and hit it 500 times, is not useful. You can build drill. Every drill you do should represent the skill you want to get. So if the skill is variable, then in order for the drill to be useful, the drill has to be variable. You have to be able to change that. And I teach that in my, you remember, we did that down, I teach it in a class called Train Like You Mean It. And I devised all these crazy drills and everybody's like, these are nutty. Right, but like you said, I don't find any value standing at the pel hitting it. The 100 below pel drill or the 100 below pel challenge. And like, what? And the question I asked, he said, "Why are you doing that?" Well, some knight said I should hit the pel 100 times.
So
I use it held to warm up.
yeah. And to clarify, a lot of your drills end up being games.
Right. Yes.
So that's not
Yes.
do this as your opponent freezes.
Right.
It's you get to do this, I get to do this. Go.
That's very much the next step is getting the correct result. Okay, if I throw that shot a little lower, you're not still parrying out here, you're not still parrying up here. Like you're responding to the situation at hand, not robotically repeating a thing and imparting a skill versus training a motion.
Right.
Or the
Result. I like the way you put that.
Yeah, all the work that Jenny and I do, because even though she does rapier and I do heavy, we train together like every day. And it's motion drills and we train with each other because that really lets me know where I need to be. A pel doesn't. I only use a pel to warm up.
The closest I get to
You know,
drills
that
for my
make
students.
sure all the armor's where it belongs. I'm sorry.
Like when you were saying, if you've drilled over and over again at 4.5 feet, and then all of a sudden the distance of your opponent is 5.5 feet, you're not going to go 5.5 feet, even if you can do 5 feet, because you've conditioned your body to think that it can only do 4.5 feet because your body has been doing 4.5 feet, and the neurons in your brain are firing. It's going 4.5 feet. That's the sweet spot.
Right.
It's like, oh, I got another foot to go, don't I? Well,
Your head goes, that's the go button, go. You throw your standard lunge, you fall this short, Vin just hits you in the head.
Usually, as I say, usually followed by you dying.
Yeah.
So
When I was a new fencer, I rapidly discovered that drills, especially the drills, are not particularly useful because as soon as your opponent stops doing his half of the drill, what you have just drilled stops working.
Yeah. I think they are good for like the initial absorption of why do we do this thing? And then, but mechanically teaching a physical skill, like the method that I find works the most, just bullet point down the like, okay, today I'm going to teach you how to throw this shot. Demonstrate the skill. And if applicable with each component, explaining what you're doing and why. So your standard Italian lunge. I am extending my guard forward. This puts my head, my upper lungs, and my heart behind my sword. Also, this is a motion I can recall very quickly if something goes wrong. I will push my weight forward behind my sword to get it closer to you. At that point, I will lift my foot and push off the back leg to continue closing the distance and put that point into your body. And explaining the purpose of every single bit of that technique. The first time you just show them like, this is a lunge. I probably looked horrible on camera. I'm sorry, YouTube. Do the second walkthrough with them performing the skill alongside you or facing you, whichever is more comfortable for you and your student. I like side by side, probably mirrored, if you can do all your stuff with the opposing hand of your student. So if they're a right-hander and they're looking at you basically this way, if you can pretend to be a lefty and mirror them. That's even better. So they can look at you and see all the things. If that's different, my left shoulder does not work with a sword in it. I probably will end up doing that barehanded. I know that's a lot harder the way shields are strapped for some people. So like facing you might be the better option.
I like behind.
That's also fair. Like watch over my shoulder is a thing I do a lot, especially with rapier blade interactions. Like I like very narrow parries where the blade misses me by this much. And it's really hard to see exactly how that works if you're looking at it from the side. Like in full speed film, it's hard to even tell watching our fights what side of each sword like we're on, the way our blades move. And then all of a sudden somebody gets hit, like, but it's not quite as bad as watching modern fencing and trying to figure out what's going on. But it's close.
As the College of St. Brutus, Ohio State University, they take a lot of fight tape. I've always wondered, do they have, can they slow that speed? Can they slow that speed? What difference would it make? How much difference would it make if they could see these fight tapes at slower speed?
If they've got the raw video, anybody with a decent editing program can at least view it at like 1/8 or whatever. My friend and house brother here does a lot of video editing.
The problem is that isn't standard video shot at 24 frames a second, which sounds like a lot.
No,
I shoot at 60.
It's
Sorry, 60?
Yeah,
That's much better.
Yeah. Like we usually film things digitally at 60 FPS at this point.
Master Phil got one of those cameras that he can shoot 10,000. It's shocking
I don't have
what
that
you
kind
get
of
to
money.
see. It's shocking what you get to see. For one, the deflection on blades is frightening.
Mamma mia.
Yeah, but slow down is always useful just to say, hey, who is that who stole my armor and is out there making me look terrible?
Every
photo of me shows up from
No one ever takes pictures of
The camera is not going to lie to you.
it's not so bad. Oh my God. Like I spend all this time railing about proper form and study the original sources. And my God, why don't I look anything like the boys? But okay, back to
We've all been
yeah. Totally got off track there. At this point, like doing the second walkthrough with your students and then mirroring you or watching or whatever. It is super important at this stage in the development to praise what they are doing correctly. And if you're one of those teachers that doesn't believe you need to praise your students, the door is right there because that's the end of the conversation with me. Cool, everybody stayed.
Personally experienced.
Uh-huh.
My dad never degraded us, but he was not big on praise.
Nope, Jade was not.
And eventually, though, I mean, I always joke. I remember when I got knighted and went to a practice, and he said, "Well, boy, you don't have suck." So the implication there is that it was 100% improvement from all suck. So from all suck to half suck is a what? Against maybe totally not sucking, I suppose. To me, that was near 100% improvement. And I got knighted. I agree. I changed it. And my night has gotten better about that. Things have gone on. But yeah, but that's important. You got to give people people are looking for some bit of validation. It's tough. Almost nobody can get through life without validation.
Positive feedback is your friend.
That's exactly where we were going. Avoiding negative corrections instead of don't shrug, that foot position is bad. You use positive phrasings of the same instruction. Relax your shoulders so you can stay ready. Again, telling them why. Would your hips be more comfortable if you pivot your back foot out or completely toward me or whichever? Explaining the benefit of a correction feels less like an admonishment.
That's another one I'm going to put a star by.
Allow the student to perform the skill on their own while supervised. Ask them to just return to standing naturally. And then visualize they've been called out to the list and they're told on your guard. And you tell them to take their guards and have them go from their natural stance to their guard, or whatever the skill is you're teaching them. Just have them do it without any other prompts other than that verbal cue, that coaching cue for whatever you're doing. That's it. Like, that's teaching a skill. Now, maintenance and everything, again, that's another class. That's the next step. But show them, explain it while you show them, not just do this. Do it with them, and then let them perform it on their own. Positive correction versus negative correction.
Wash, rinse, repeat.
Yep. Progress is progress. Switch things up a little after following the example of, okay, get in your guard. Get in your guard. Whichever version of your guard that you use. And we teach them how to walk around. Day one lesson. Give them a brain break. Give them something else to do. They've been moving their body around a bunch in weird ways. They've been walking in, like crab walking, in a way that most people are not used to. Put a sword in their hand. Give them something else to play with. That they've been learning how to stand for 5 minutes straight now, and they're tired and they're bored of it, and they're wondering why they're doing this. Switching up. Having them think they're about to do something completely different will refresh interest. And this is where psychology is manipulation. Having them think they're about to do something different will refresh interest. Reinforcing that skill, building on prior material, like we said in the beginning. What they're about to do is not totally different. It will incorporate the same skill that they've just been made familiar with. And then they get to play with the sword. And they get to step forward and hit something. And on day one, that's a super important thing. Like, I don't care if they don't have armor that fits. I don't care if they didn't bring a cup or they're not wearing, the full gear. Put something in their hand and let them play with the sword. That's why we're all here. Like, we're freaking sword nerds.
You know who you ought to connect with too?
Get the hook in them.
Vito's Minions. Vito's whole how they bring people into Vito's Minions. That's a Cleveland heavy fighting group. He's got a whole, he has this, but one of the things is get them in armor, show them, tell them they look good, and then get them swinging the stick.
Yeah.
No matter how bad they are, because the other thing that I have discovered is no matter how much you want to talk about sword fighting, everybody comes with a preconceived notion because they've watched too many bad 80s movies or 90s movies or 2000s movies. Most of the sword fighting is just atrocious because it has to be visible to the camera.
Yeah, stage combat is not combat.
Right. And so let them get out there. Don't try and explain to them that this movie trick isn't going to work. Just let them go try it, provided they're not going to hurt anybody. And they'll quickly figure out that this is not what they think. And then you can actually start teaching them. But until you disabuse them of their notion, they're unteachable.
My favorite phrase for that is, I'm excited to see you do that.
Yeah.
And genuinely be excited. Like,
Yeah.
And sometimes the
this is fun for us.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna backskate or you're gonna do that multi thing.
Oh my God.
Oh, I love it when people pull that off.
It looks great in the Count of Monte Cristo remake.
Yeah.
It works with the small swords.
If I could have Jim Caviezel's stunt guy, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, it works with the small sword. That is not a rapier thing.
Oh, God.
And here, like, which is funny, this lays like right back into the next point. You're almost reading my mind here, Wayne. When you're doing these like antagonistic drills with your opponent, because we all go through these, like, okay, you're going to punch block and throw a counter shot. You're going to parry, or you're going to kibase on my attempt to gain. And do not defeat your student at that moment. Do not tell them that the thing you just taught them to do does not work, because that's exactly what you're doing. Do not break the drill. We all know, like, you've earned that white belt, you've earned the bronze ring, you've earned that collar. Like, we know you can beat the new guy. You don't need to prove it to yourself. You should only need to prove it to the new guy that thinks he's going to step up, like, once, maybe twice. And he'll either stay or he'll go. You're not proving it to anybody sitting on the sidelines. Like, they all know.
Nobody wins practice.
And when you're trying to teach somebody a thing, that thing needs to succeed. When you're trying to refine a thing, now, there's an optimal succeed-failure rate for, like, how hard do I push making this drill, like, antagonistic. But again, there's a whole subsection of sports psychology on just that topic. But, oh my God. The student may also realize they have a surprise answer to that drill and defeat them themselves. Like, they will figure out that instead of going through that first or second set of blocks and counters before they get to the kill shot, that they have another way to exploit your second intention, the second tempo you give them. That's a good sign that they are done with the first drill and they can move on. And you praise them for thinking about that and pulling it off. And then you go ahead and move on to whatever the next topic is. When drilling in a group, it is like teaching a class on if you're teaching martial arts in a class setting, there, brain, mouth, connect. It's super necessary to watch for this happening in your pairings where they're starting to go outside the drill. That's a good sign that they're getting bored. But they also need to be reminded that they are not competing when they are doing these drills with one another. They are cooperating to learn a thing. The last real, like, super salient point on the sheet, this took a little bit longer than I expected, but we still have 10 minutes. Thank you. Developing a skill progression with a student, lessons should review previously taught skills. Like, have a plan. The first part of that plan should repeat, like, the core fundamental of whatever your particular art is. In archery, it's your shot process. Everything you teach in archery is your shot process. In rapier, it is primarily your lunge and opposition. All of my classes with my past, like, week 4 students, we are doing a lunge and opposition. That is, touch the blade and attack, and your attack goes through and displaces my weapon. Everything in Italian rapier relies on the victor finding a way to do that to their opponent. If you do that in another way, it is dangerous and stupid. You must have control of that blade. So we review that core fundamental skill every week, and we just burn that into their brain. And then we review what they actually learned last week. Just a little bit, hey, so we talked a little bit about tempo and the disengage and how we can trigger that to take advantage of their opponent or take advantage of our opponent, or how we use our disengage to take advantage of our opponent. So we know what it looks like from both sides, a good disengage and a bad. And then we're going to go on to, okay, so how do we defeat that? Or how do I use that in more depth? But review, bring to mind the previous skill, or earlier skills that are going to be involved in the next lesson. Skill degradation in early stages of learning is accelerated. And few of us have an opportunity to practice with an experienced combatant more than once a week. It's good to invite them to practice things at home, obviously, in short sessions, some basic footwork, sort of lunge sequence, 10 times a day, not many more. Unsupervised, it's very easy to let undesirable habits become trained in. If they do nothing but bad footwork at home, they're going to do nothing but bad footwork in practice. But if they do 10 minutes of bad footwork at home, like 2 days a week, while they're off, and they come back and their footwork's a little off because they've been doing that for 20 minutes, okay, like that's a much easier thing to apply that positive correction and have them get on with it. Praise successes and employ positive correction. I have that written down like 47 times in this sheet.
One time written down.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't run over into who's following me. Oh, right, my next class. And you'll find throughout the roadmap that will be provided that the lessons that I have written out will call back to earlier skills for all of the reasons.
It's a good handout, but they're not going to contact them.
No, I will take care of that.
I'd like to send you my training manual and get your critique.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd love to look over it. And like, I'll make that a digital version of that available, my email address available. There were some
Okay.
logistics.
If you want to write an email on this,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
take it with
yeah,
me.
will do. I have a QR code for my Google Docs folder that contains all three of these. I need to make sure it is still currently functional. And if not, just get my email address and I will make sure that these get to you. Okay, introducing new skills. Most of the lessons that I have written out, small section of introductions is included. This is introducing concepts, jargon, whatever. These things should be discussed when you're introducing and explaining why a technique is performed. So the reason we do this little thing where we duck down our sword is not to get on the other side of them when they press on your blade. The reason we do that is to evade having them pressed on your blade in the first place. If you didn't know that, congratulations, you've been doing Italian rapier wrong. The Germans will happily wait for you to push. Totally different thing. But if you're adhering to a specific skill, whatever, let them know why a thing is done when it's introduced. Hey, so I spent this entire time calling back to previous material in that. Hopefully I've been doing a good job teaching. But knowing why something is done is the key to the student being able to choose freely when to do it. Coming from a teaching martial arts perspective, I don't want to sound cliche, but to quote Bruce Lee, martial art is the art of expressing one's individuality through the human body. You choose how you fight. You might have a lot of influences from the people who taught you, but ultimately, how you fight is going to be an extension of you. So you need to be able to choose when and why you do certain things. There's always going to be more than one answer to a puzzle. That's what makes this more than just a rote repetition of strikes until somebody gets hit. And your student will develop their own flavor of your fighting. And that's the beautiful moment. That is when you realize that they have broken out of your mold. Usually about the third or fourth time, they totally and utterly surprise you and kick your ass. And you realize that I didn't teach you that, but that is totally on brand. That's, I love that moment. So just to go over the basic points in closing, and I will give us a few minutes to take a break, and if anybody's sticking around for the second half. Step one, establish a common vocabulary. Step two, teaching physical skills requires repetition, praise, and positive correction. Step three, adapt to your student and allow them their limitations. All these things I have talked about how not to break their brain, how not to make them feel like they're unwelcome, they're not doing right, is part of adapting to your student. And reinforce skills by including them in later material. You were never done with the basics.
It's all I train.
It's all I train.
I don't have any fancy moves. I just keep working on the basics.
Yeah, it is all I actually train. I just come up with new applications of them.
Yeah.
Drills should end with the student success. Mostly, there's that 60-40 optimal and antagonistic drills for later. But maintaining a skill versus imparting a skill versus improving a skill. Whole other class. Introduce things in small batches. 2, 3 concepts or techniques per lesson at the most. Otherwise, fire hose. Cool. Get out of here.
Nice.
Thank you.
I mean, you have to get out of here.
Not you, you just go.
Can I just get your email before I go?
Yes.
Same here, although I'm not going.
You just say it out loud and I'll have it.